Most careers don't break at the beginning. They stall after onboarding ends. The structure fades, expectations blur, and suddenly the responsibility to grow becomes personal. At the same time, work is changing faster than ever. AI is reshaping roles, hybrid teams are redefining trust, and pressure is being managed, not always well. This series isn't about motivation, and it isn't about surviving hustle culture. It's about what actually helps individuals stay effective, adaptable, and mentally ready after the first 90 days. We'll explore how people create clarity when guidance is thin, how they build skills that matter in an AI-accelerated workplace, and how they protect their energy without disengaging. Because being mission-ready isn't a personality trait, it's a way of working, one that can be designed. This is Mission Ready, thriving as an individual in the age of AI. Onboarding is designed to get people started. It explains the role, it introduces the culture, and it creates early momentum. But onboarding was never designed to carry a career forward. Most organizations assume that once the first 90 days are complete, success will largely take care of itself. In reality, that's where many careers quietly stall. Not because people lack talent, motivation, or work ethic, but because structure fades, expectations blur, and growth is no longer intentionally reinforced. This episode focuses on the phase that follows onboarding, the critical stretch between day 90 and your first 2 years. It's the period where ownership replaces instruction, where clarity has to be created rather than provided, and where long-term trajectories start to take shape. Designing that phase well is one of the most important decisions an individual can make early in their career. Onboarding is designed to create momentum. Goals are clear. Feedback is frequent. Expectations are visible. In those first 90 days, performance often feels obvious. People know what success looks like, and they know when they're moving toward it. But once onboarding ends, something subtle changes. Structure drops sharply. Guidance becomes less frequent. And development conversations often fade into the background. What makes this phase dangerous is that nothing appears to be wrong. Output continues, meetings continue, work moves forward. But growth is no longer reinforced unless it's intentionally designed. This isn't failure, it isn't disengagement, and it isn't a lack of capability. It's silence. And silence is where performance risk quietly begins to grow. Most capable employees start strong. Early on, learning is rapid, feedback is frequent, momentum builds naturally as people absorb new systems, expectations, and roles. But that early curve doesn't continue indefinitely. Between months 3 and 12, performance often flattens, not because effort drops, not because ability disappears, but because signals begin to fade. As structure tapers off, people default to what feels safe. They repeat what worked early. They focus on delivery rather than development. In that environment, capability remains, but direction doesn't. And without direction, growth slows quietly, even while work appears to be going well. After onboarding ends, most organizations don't intentionally withdraw support. They simply assume it's no longer needed. Competence is often interpreted as clarity. Steady output is taken as a sign that direction is understood, and silence is read as trust. As a result, feedback becomes less frequent, development conversations happen less often, and expectations remain mostly implicit rather than explicit. None of this looks like neglect. From the outside, things appear to be working. But over time, that silence creates drift. People continue delivering, but they're no longer sure how success is being evaluated or where growth is supposed to come from. This is the organizational blind spot, not a lack of care, but a lack of ongoing signal. There is a point after onboarding where the system steps back. Not intentionally, not dramatically, but consistently. At that moment, growth becomes largely self-managed. Direction is no longer reinforced by process, and waiting for clarity becomes a subtle risk. This is where responsibility quietly shifts to the individual, not because organizations stop caring, but because they assume capability equals readiness. This phase isn't about working harder, it's about working deliberately, choosing where to focus, deciding what to build, and creating signal where silence exists. How this moment is handled determines whether the next 2 years compound into progress or settle into maintenance. After onboarding, many people focus on doing the job well. They deliver what's asked, they meet expectations, and on the surface, that looks like success. But high performers begin thinking differently, often much earlier. They move beyond participation and start designing how they grow. They pay attention to time horizons, not just this week or this quarter, but where today's choices are leading over the next 2 years. Early in a role, effort compounds quickly, skills stack faster, patterns form sooner, and small decisions begin shaping long-term trajectory. This phase isn't about ambition for ambition's sake, it's about direction. The first 2 years do more than fill a resume. They quietly establish how a career unfolds. As early role scaffolding fades, directional signals become less explicit. Expectations usually don't disappear, they become assumed. Priorities remain, but they're no longer reinforced through structure or routine guidance. In that environment, many professionals pause. They continue delivering, but they wait for clarity to be reintroduced. High performers take a different approach. They treat clarity as something to be constructed, not received. That process begins with disciplined questioning. What outcomes truly matter in this role? Where are expectations implied rather than stated? And how is good performance actually evaluated beyond task completion? Clarity isn't about having perfect information. It's about reducing ambiguity enough to move forward deliberately. When guidance is thin, direction becomes a skill, one that separates sustained progress from quiet drift. Not all work builds capability, and not all learning creates leverage. In many roles, it's easy to stay busy while capability plateaus. Tasks get completed, effort is visible, but impact doesn't meaningfully increase. High performers make a clear distinction between tasks and skills. Tasks create output. Skills reduce friction. The most valuable learning doesn't add more work. It makes the same work easier, faster, or more reliable. That's why depth matters more than accumulation. A small number of well-developed skills will compound over time, while scattered learning often leads to what looks like progress but produces very little leverage. Capability that compounds isn't about doing more. It's about deliberately building what makes everything else work better. Capability and clarity don't operate in isolation. Over time, performance depends on alignment, knowing whether your work is pointed in the right direction and whether it still matters. That alignment doesn't come from meetings alone. It comes from signal, from understanding who you actually need input from, where feedback truly originates, and how information moves through the organization, formally and informally. High performers are intentional about connection. They don't seek constant validation, and they don't depend on reassurance to make progress. Instead, they establish a small number of reliable alignment points, enough to stay oriented, enough to correct course early. This kind of connection prevents silent rework, reduces unnecessary effort, and protects against burnout driven by misalignment, not workload. Connection isn't about proximity. It's about staying pointed in the right direction. Most organizations rely on 90-day plans. They use them to set priorities, review performance, and adjust direction without waiting a full year. What's interesting is that individuals rarely apply the same rhythm to themselves. A 90-day cycle works because it sits in the right place. It's short enough to correct course before patterns harden, and long enough to see whether effort is actually producing results. When growth feels unfocused, the problem is often not motivation, it's the absence of rhythm. A simple, repeatable 90-day structure creates checkpoints for learning, alignment, and momentum, without adding complexity or pressure. Used consistently, it becomes a quiet system that prevents drift while allowing progress to compound over time. A 90-day cycle works best when it stays simple. This isn't about building a long list of goals or tracking every possible improvement. Momentum comes from focus. A strong cycle begins with 1 to 3 outcomes that genuinely matter, outcomes that move your role, your value, or your trajectory forward. Alongside that, choose one skill to deliberately sharpen, not general learning, not scattered development, one capability that, if improved, reduces friction or increases impact. Every cycle also needs a feedback point, a person, signal, or moment that tells you whether direction is holding. And finally, one visible contribution, something tangible that demonstrates progress and reinforces your value beyond activity. This loop is intentionally small. Simplicity creates momentum. The goal isn't to do more, it's to make progress repeatable. Early in a role, momentum matters more than spectacle. Big bets can wait. Perfection can wait. Stability cannot. Early wins aren't about ego or visibility for its own sake. They reinforce confidence, yours and everyone else's. When progress is visible, trust forms faster. Not trust in potential, but trust in reliability. That trust quietly creates permission. Permission to take on more responsibility, permission to influence decisions, and permission to stretch into larger opportunities over time. Momentum reduces risk, not by avoiding challenge, but by establishing a stable foundation first. In the long run, sustained progress beats dramatic effort every time. What plateau actually looks like. Plateau rarely shows up as failure. Most of the time, it looks like quiet disengagement. People continue performing. They rely more heavily on what already works, and they stop stretching without consciously deciding to stop growing. Over time, effort increases, but progress doesn't. This is where burnout often begins, not through overload, but through ambiguity. When direction is unclear, energy is spent guessing instead of building. Work starts to feel heavier, not because there's more of it, but because it's no longer clearly connected to growth or purpose. Left unaddressed, this phase quietly erodes engagement long before performance metrics show a problem. Plateau isn't a sudden drop. It's a slow drift that most people don't recognize until momentum is already gone. After onboarding, growth doesn't default. It must be designed. When structure fades, waiting becomes risk. Momentum depends on clarity, capability, and connection, built deliberately over time. Everything in this episode follows from that idea, and everything ahead builds on it. Direction matters. But clarity alone doesn't explain why capable people hesitate, why they hold back questions they already have, why obvious risks stay unspoken, and why smart, experienced professionals sometimes disengage quietly instead of pushing ideas forward. In many environments, performance isn't limited by skill, motivation, or effort. It's constrained by judgment, by whether speaking up feels safe enough, early enough, and worth the cost. That tension grows sharper in hybrid, remote, and increasingly monitored workplaces, where signals are thinner and missteps feel more permanent. In those settings, people don't stop caring, they start calculating. In the next episode, we'll examine the invisible forces that shape whether people engage fully or quietly protect themselves by staying silent, and why organizations that misunderstand this dynamic often mistake compliance for commitment right up until progress stalls.